To hold supreme sovereign power is to live in a state of perpetual terror. When one sits on the highest throne, every shadow hides a usurper, and the burden of leadership breeds an inescapable underlying paranoia.
It really truly does.
And just listen for a moment. Notice the crisp rustling of this heavy paper here on the table between us. Hear the soft clinking of my ceramic teacup against its saucer.
Mm-hmm.
Breathe in that rich, grounding scent of old wood and herbal tea. You are sitting right here at the table with us in Cafe Karma International, our silent, observant guest. We are taking you on a mission for this deep dive, an exploration into the heavenly level of the Nakshatra known as Jyeshtha.
It's a profoundly heavy space to enter, because when we filter through the sheer volume of astronomical data in these ancient texts piled between our teacups here, a very specific, almost intimidating picture of Jyeshtha emerges.
Right.
We are looking at the absolute peak of worldly maturity. Linguistically, the Sanskrit root translates to the eldest or the seniormost, or even the sovereign.
The sovereign, yeah.
But studying these texts, it becomes super clear. This isn't merely about chronological age. You know, it's not just about having gray hair. It represents the heavy burden of existence right at the top. It is the archetype of the individual who has clawed their way to the absolute summit of material, administrative, or societal eminence.
And as we know, the air is extraordinarily thin at the summit.
Exactly.
I was reviewing the sidereal astronomical charts in our research stack earlier, and the physical location of this constellation seems to perfectly mirror that exact tension you're describing.
It really does.
Jyeshtha spans exactly from 16 degrees 40 minutes to 30 degrees Siddle minutes in the sign of Scorpio. But the texts we pulled heavily emphasize the very end of this span. The conclusion of Jyeshtha marks a point known as the Gandanta.
Ah, yes. The Gandanta.
From the commentary we're reading, this isn't just some invisible line on a map. It's considered one of the most volatile junctures in the entire celestial wheel.
Precisely. The term Gandanta translates to a spiritual knot.
A knot, right.
And to understand this psychologically, without using a ton of confusing jargon, we have to look at what is actually happening at that exact 30-degree mark of Scorpio.
Mm-hmm.
It represents a highly dangerous and unstable transition point. You are at the absolute deepest, darkest edge of the watery realm of Scorpio, right before crossing over into the fiery, aspirational realm of Sagittarius.
So it's water meeting fire.
Yes. Think about the physics of water and fire colliding. There is no gentle blending there. There is a violent, explosive reaction. You get steam, immense pressure, severe friction, and the complete dissolution of one state of matter into another. That psychological boiling point is the raw energy of this knot.
And sitting right in the middle of that boiling water is the principal star of this constellation.
Right.
Looking at the modern astronomical data cross-referenced with the historical mythology, the star is Antares.
Antares, yeah.
It's a red supergent that glows with this fierce, pulsing hue in the night sky. The ancients revered it, giving it the title, the Heart of the Scorpion. But what stands out in these historical notes is its secondary title. They called it the Rival of Mars.
The Rival of Mars. That is such a crucial piece of the puzzle.
Because its fierce red light literally competes with the red planet itself. It radiates this raw martial intensity. It demands your attention.
And that rivalry implies a constant state of challenge, right? A person operating under this influence is not resting on their laurels. They are constantly proving their right to hold power. The heart of the scorpion is not a passive organ. It pumps venom, survival instinct, and absolute determination straight through the veins of the archetype.
Which brings us to the actual mechanics of how this energy operates. Because the astrological texts we gathered highlight a massive contradiction, or at least a very complex synthesis regarding the planetary rulers.
Oh, absolutely.
On one hand, Jyeshtha is ruled by Mercury, known as Buddha.
Right.
Mercury is the planet of spreadsheets, logistics, cool communication, and sharp calculating discrimination.
The pure intellect.
Exactly. But because Jyeshtha sits entirely within the domain of Scorpio, it is simultaneously governed by Scorpio's sign ruler, which is Mars, or Mangal. So we have the cool, calculating intellect of Mercury, forced to share a vehicle with the fiery, transformative, and intensely aggressive energy of Mars.
It is a phenomenal pairing to analyze. Normally, we think of intellect and aggression as entirely opposing forces, but here they synthesize into a nature classified in the ancient texts as Tikshna.
Tikshna.
Yes, Tikshna translates to sharp, dreadful, and bitter.
Dreadful and bitter.
Yeah, it implies that sovereignty is not handed over on a silver platter. To achieve and maintain one's desires in this space, one must be willing to endure and inflict intense friction. It requires a mind that can navigate difficult, often harsh realities.
Right.
It is a very pragmatic, occasionally ruthless energy that calculates the exact amount of force required to maintain the throne.
Going through these notes, it paints a picture of a very specific dynamic. It is exactly like a high-tech security alarm system.
Oh, that's a perfect way to look at it.
The cool, calculating sensors of Mercury are directly wired into the explosive Marshall response of Mars. It is analytical, but intensely fierce when triggered.
Exactly. The mind is constantly scanning the perimeter. It analyzes every single data point, every whisper in the corridor, every subtle shift in allegiance with pure, detached mercurial precision. But the moment an anomaly is detected, the response mechanism is purely Martian. It is ready to strike, ready to defend, and ready to neutralize the threat at a moment's notice. The intellect serves the defense strategy.
That idea of a hair-trigger alarm system perfectly explains the profound paranoia we see in the foundational myth of this star.
It really does.
We cannot dive into the concept of sovereign power without analyzing the presiding deity of Jyeshtha found in the source texts. Indra, the king of the gods.
Indra is the supreme archetype of the sovereign, and his mythology is deeply complex. He embodies a duality that perfectly mirrors the human experience of attaining ultimate power. First, the texts establish his heroic aspect. Indra is the ultimate dragon slayer. He is most famous for defeating Vritra, a terrifying cosmic serpent who had hoarded and swallowed all the waters of the universe, causing a devastating world-ending drought.
A literal world ender.
Exactly. And to defeat this serpent, Indra didn't just use brute force. He used the Vajra, an invincible thunderbolt. He utilized courage, strategy, and immense overwhelming force to liberate the waters and restore order to the cosmos.
So he is the undeniable hero who saves the world.
He is.
But the shadow side of this sovereignty, as documented in these same texts, is where the story takes a dark and deeply psychological turn. We have to examine Indra's fatal flaw, his lust, and the catastrophic mistake he made by deceiving Sage Gautama's wife.
It is a story of power completely corrupting the boundaries of morality.
Yeah.
Indra, intoxicated by his own supreme position and sensual appetite, believed himself above consequence. He shape-shifted to perfectly resemble Sage Gautama in order to bypass the sage's defenses and seduce his wife. It was an act of profound deceit, utilizing his divine abilities for base, personal gratification. And when the actual sage discovered this trespass, his fury was absolute. He didn't just punish Indra physically. He cursed him with a punishment designed to inflict the ultimate carnal shame and destroy his sovereign dignity entirely.
Hey,
He caused Indra's body to be covered in 1,000 vaginas.
you read a myth like that in the texts and it forces you to just pause.
It really does.
It is the absolute visceral destruction of his dignity. The king of the gods, exposed, humiliated, and marked by his own illicit desires for the entire cosmos to see. The psychological weight of that kind of public shame is staggering.
Staggering.
But the mythological research shows the story doesn't end in that state of humiliation, because goddess Lakshmi intervenes. She takes those 1,000 marks of profound shame and transforms them into 1,000 eyes.
And this moment of divine intervention is the absolute psychological crux of Jyeshtha.
Yeah.
The transformation from marks of vulnerability and shame into 1,000 eyes represents the literal birth of absolute hypervigilance.
Hypervigilance.
Yes. Indra goes from being exposed and humiliated to being the god who sees absolutely everything. He is now forever watching. This symbolizes the deep, inescapable paranoia of losing the throne. Having experienced the devastating consequences of deceit, his own deceit, he is now terrified of being deceived or overthrown. The eyes are a defense mechanism born directly from trauma.
It's the ultimate cosmic overcorrection. You make one terrible mistake and suddenly you're the universe's most exhausted surveillance camera.
Exactly. And that exhaustion is very real. That hypervigilance is a heavy, almost unbearable burden. It means the mind is constantly mobilized.
It can never power down.
Never. When you have 1,000 eyes open at all times, you are always looking for the next threat, the next usurper hiding in the shadows, the next betrayal. The trauma of the fall creates a psychological fortress that traps the king inside his own mind.
Which perfectly contextualizes the unique power, or Shakti, associated with Jyeshtha in our research materials. It is identified as Arahana Shakti.
Arahana Shakti translates to the power to rise, to conquer, and to gain courage in battle. But given the context of Indra's fall and redemption, It is not just about rising in a vacuum.
Right.
It is the raw, mobilizing force that turns a disgraced survivor into a victorious hero. It is the ability to face overwhelming odds, to gather your strength after a devastating public defeat, and to elevate yourself above the chaos to establish authority once again.
The resilience of a sovereign who refuses to stay defeated.
Precisely.
But because of that underlying paranoia, because of the 1,000 eyes, that power to rise is always kept on standby. We see this defensive, heavily guarded posture reflected perfectly in the three physical symbols associated with Jyeshtha in the ancient iconography.
Let's look at those.
Yeah, the visual data we pulled. First, there is the umbrella. Now, ordinarily, we think of an umbrella as a simple tool for the rain, but in these texts, it carries massive sovereign weight.
The umbrella, or the parasol, is a traditional, highly visible insignia of royalty in antiquity. But functionally and psychologically, it provides sanctuary. Yes. It shields the sovereign from the literal and metaphorical storms of life. It signifies that the individual holds a status that requires shielding from the harsh elements, the drudgery, and the mundane struggles that ordinary people must endure. It creates a defined perimeter of protection around the leader.
The second symbol detailed in the iconography is the earring.
The earring is fascinating. It signifies vast material wealth, certainly, but more importantly, it represents divine hearing.
Divine hearing.
In the context of the paranoid sovereign, divine hearing is about surveillance. It is the ability to listen closely, to pick up on any subtle whispers of dissent, treason, or plotting within the dark corridors of the kingdom. It is the auditory equivalent of those 1,000 eyes.
The sovereign must hear what is not being said loudly.
Exactly.
And finally, the third symbol we have here in our notes. The amulet, or talisman.
The amulet represents supernatural protection. When you sit on the highest throne, conventional armor, swords, walls, armies is not enough. You need psychological and spiritual shielding against the jealousy, the intrigue, and the evil eye of those who covet your position. The talisman is the mystical defense against unseen, insidious threats that seek to undermine your authority from the shadows.
Looking at these three symbols together, it is exactly like traveling through life surrounded by an elite team of royal bodyguards.
It really is.
It proves that your life is incredibly valuable and powerful, but it also means your daily existence is inherently defensive. You are always under threat.
And that realization forces us to question the very nature of success at this magnitude. When you have the umbrella to block the storms, the earring to hear the whispers, and the amulet to ward off the evil eye, you've essentially built an impenetrable fortress. But a fortress designed to keep every conceivable enemy out also permanently traps the sovereign inside. They are isolated by the very tools that guarantee their safety.
So I turn to you, sitting here at the quiet table with us, listening to the rustle of these ancient papers. Based on the texts we've unpacked today, what actually happens when a human mind inherits these 1,000 eyes? What is the physical and mental toll on a person who can never, ever rest their vigilance? When does the sovereign protector finally cross the line and become a terrified prisoner of their own paranoia?
This fascinating transition from the grand heavenly myths of cosmic kings into the earthly, grueling psychological reality of living with that burden in the modern world is exactly where the next deep dive will begin.